Every year we collect information in our post-test about what you would like to see differently. And over the years, you have told us that you want to get together in the big room, you want to hear the speakers tell their stories, you want an opportunity to go into the breakout rooms and meet kids from other schools, and you want an opportunity to put together a plan of action to start to raise awareness about mental health issues, addiction, and stigma in your own school communities. So that's why we designed this day to look like this. So there's going to be lots of back and forth and things like that. We also want to highlight school initiatives. So you will see that St. John de Brébeuf is going to be presenting after lunch today with some of the initiatives that they have done back in their school to raise awareness about mental health issues. And I think that we also wanted to include some local talent and local music. So we have the Youth Speak Band will be here and entertaining you after lunch, just so that you can get a broader picture on when it comes time to eliminate the stigma associated with mental illness and addiction. You don't just talk about it, you can write about it, you can do drama, you can do art. You'll notice in your bags that we gave you some journals from the York Region TAMI Coalition. And those are made possible, and this whole day really is made possible through the generous support of the Royal Bank Foundation through the Healthy Minds Canada initiative. So we want to thank Royal Bank Foundation very much for their support in this day. Go ahead. Thank Royal Bank. And we also would like to thank Purdue Pharma through the Ontario Shores Foundation. Purdue Pharma came forward and offered some support in helping you with some of the things that you'll take away today. So let's hear it for Purdue Pharma. All that said and done, we've got a busy day. I'm mindful of time, and I want to get moving along here and see what's next on the show. And I think, first of all, I would like everybody who is associated with this list. This is your York Region Talking About Addiction and Mental Illness Coalition. This is the partnerships that we have in here. So everybody associated with this coalition, please stand up and be acknowledged. You know, they're probably in the rooms. Here's a bunch here, over here. We got speakers over here. Stand up, Jesse. We got speakers. So we've got people from the York Region Coalition. Without them working hard on this day, you wouldn't be here. So let's hear it for those folks. Now I think for me, in order to understand this group a little bit better, it's very important that I get to know you. So I'm going to run you through a survey. Now this is basically not a survey where you're going to need a pen and paper. This is a survey, a very scientific survey, by the way, that was designed by Dr. Ian Manning from the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health. And it's basically a survey where I'm going to read a statement, and if your answer is yes, I want you to stand up. And if your answer is no, I want you to sit down. Okay? And if you don't want anybody to see your answers, just simply cover your eyes. We'll give Jesse the mic and let him tell us his journey. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesse.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I don't think I'm even up yet. I had my tea this morning, but I'm still kind of half asleep. Today, I have many different issues. I've had many issues in my life. I've dealt with addictions, I've dealt with anxiety, I've dealt with obsessive compulsive disorder. But the biggest thing I've had to deal with probably is schizophrenia. So I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in '99. And this was around the same time I was graduating high school. I barely graduated high school. My marks were horrible. I was flirtedly psychotic. Growing up, I was a quote-unquote normal kid. I played a lot of sports. I was a singer in a couple of different rock bands. I had a lot of girlfriends. So life was good. In grade 9 and 10, my marks were great, and there was no sign of mental illness yet. Around grade 11, my marks started to slip, and I started to do a lot of street drugs. So I started to smoke weed and hash every day, and I also experimented with magic mushrooms, acid, ecstasy, cocaine, and speed. So I was doing a lot of street drugs. And I was misdiagnosed with having drug-induced psychosis. So for those of you who do not know, psychosis is basically a break from reality, right? So something is going on in your mind apart from reality, and it's your specific trip, is the best way I can explain it. So I was misdiagnosed with having drug-induced psychosis first, but what happened was I went off all of the drugs. I stopped eating meat, I stopped drinking caffeine, I was drinking lots of water, I was exercising, and that was for a few months, and my symptoms persisted, and that's when I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I have no family history of mental illness. Oftentimes people with schizophrenia or people with other mental illnesses will have a family connection, like somebody in their family has had a mental illness, but not in my case. So when I became psychotic, my folks and friends, nobody knew exactly what was happening because, as I said, there was no family history, and at the time there wasn't really any public education about schizophrenia. So there was very few people out there talking about it. So my mom did a lot of research though, and she was always a great support. So my illness is very religious. I wasn't raised religiously. In fact, I hadn't set foot in a church until I became psychotic. So schizophrenia doesn't come on overnight. It's kind of a gradual process. So when, there is something called the prodromal stage, which is sort of the stage before you become completely psychotic, so leading up to the illness. For me, it started out being slight paranoia. So I remember one time I was in the schoolyard at my high school, and there was a group of kids over here talking and laughing, and I thought they were laughing at me, right? So slight paranoia. At the time, I was selling drugs. I was getting into fights. I was lying to people. I was stealing money off my mom. So I was in a pretty bad state. Like I said, my illness is very religious. So when I spiraled into something a lot worse, I started to have a lot of delusions and hallucinations. Now the hallucinations I have are auditory, but people with schizophrenia can have any type of hallucination having to do with any of your senses. So they could be smelling things, they could be touching things, smelling things that aren't there, touching things, and hearing and seeing. All of the senses, you can have a hallucination, but for me, it is auditory hallucinations. So the best way for me to explain what it's like to hear voices is I have, when I think with my own voice, right? And we all do that. That's a regular thought process. We hear our own voice in our mind as our thoughts. So I had that regular thought process, but on top I would have additional voices. So on the left side, I would have a very commanding, destructive male voice that I believe was the devil. And on the right side, I would hear a very calming, soothing female voice that I believe was the Virgin Mary. So I started to hear these voices. If I was on a train, like I live in Toronto and I take the TTC a lot. If I was on the train and there was a train car full of people, I could hear everybody's thoughts in my mind, like all at once, right? Pretty overwhelming. And I believe it was the devil taking everybody's thoughts and putting them in my mind. As well, I believe that the devil could take my thoughts and put them into other people's minds. So I was very scared to think about my bank PIN number or think about my locker combination for fear of people, hearing that in their minds. one time I was on the train. I heard a voice saying, "Kill all these people and then kill yourself." So this was the scariest thing I ever heard, probably. I would never act upon it. I'm very strong-willed, very loving, very positive, so I would never act upon it. But just hearing that was pretty bad. Has anybody seen the movie The Soloist? Anybody seen this? A few of you? Yeah. In The Soloist, basically The Soloist is a movie about a guy on the streets who's an incredible violinist. And so he's on the streets, but he has schizophrenia. And this movie is with Jamie Foxx as the main subject, and then Robert Downey Jr. as the journalist. Anyways, in the movie, there's a couple of scenes that reenact what it's like to hear voices. If you change the words around a little bit, that's exactly my experience hearing voices, right? It was so real for me. I almost got up and ran out of the theater because it was so real for me. But I didn't. I stayed and I watched the rest of the movie. But if you want to sort of understand what it's like to hear voices, check out The Soloist. So I was hearing voices. At first, I would reply in my mind. Then I would reply out loud, speaking out loud. And then finally I would reply yelling back, right? Everybody's seen a street person, you know, on the street yelling at nothing, right? Everybody's seen that, right? That is somebody yelling back at the voices they're hearing, the internal stimuli. And when we start to hear voices and have delusions, we can keep it together for a while, right? Because nobody can read your mind, right? So if you don't look completely distressed yet, then, you know, people don't know what's going on. Unfortunately, people don't normally get treatment until they've hit rock bottom, and they're just, you know, totally in a rough state. So there was a lot of religious delusions going on. I believe that the left hand represented the devil and the right hand represented God. So I believe that the devil was training me to find good souls for him by watching people work with their hands, and if they finish with their left hand, they're doing work for the devil. If they finish with their right hand, they're doing work for God. If I was with two people, say my parents, my dad would always be the devil and my mom would always be God, so I would only speak to my mom. There'd be two black crows in the trees in my backyard. I believe they were the devil's bird watching me all the time. At one point, I wasn't able to use any technology, so I couldn't use a computer or a cell phone. I unplugged the clock radio, couldn't watch the TV because I believe it was the devil. The devil was using technology to keep humanity in check or dependent on him. So with all this going on in my mind, I grew my hair long, I grew a long beard, and I started to neglect my hygiene. I would lay up in the bed all day laughing demonically or breaking down crying. I would walk through the park system all day because I didn't want to talk to anybody. When you are hearing voices, it's very hard to have a regular conversation with somebody, very hard to communicate. So with my long hair and beard, I had a girlfriend at the time who was Portuguese Catholic. And she brought me back to her parents' apartment. And they had all this religious stuff, like, you know, movies and pictures and everything. And I saw a picture of Jesus Christ on the wall. I said, wow, I look like Jesus Christ, you know. So that's a coincidence, you know. Except Jesus in the picture had brown eyes and I had blue eyes. That was the only difference I could see. But a little later on, I actually started to believe I was Jesus Christ. An example of me being Jesus Christ was as I got a job working at the Dominion stocking shelves on the graveyard shift. And as I was putting cans up on the shelf, I believed I was blessing them. And then I thought, well, I can't bless all these cans. So if I touch a can the second time, I'm unblessing it, right? So it took me the whole night to stock one shelf, and they fired me that night. They fired Jesus Christ. Can you believe it? But I was working for I was working minimum wage jobs, moving from, I call them Joe jobs. So moving from Joe job to Joe job, couldn't hold a job. So eventually needed to get help. I needed to get help because I hit rock bottom and I was really, really sick. So my folks brought my dad's GP to the house, and he sat with me for about 5-10 minutes and said, yeah, he's really sick. He needs to be hospitalized. So he filled out a Form 1, which is a legal document, saying that I be apprehended by the police, not arrested, but apprehended because it was a mental health matter. So one day the cruiser pulls up, they put me in handcuffs, put me in the back of the cruiser, bring me to the back door of Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, and they interviewed me, and I said, great, they're going to interview me and say I'm okay and let me go, right? But that's not the case. Wasn't the case anyways, and I was admitted to CAMH, and I spent 3 months on the ward while they tried medications on me, and finally landed on one that works for me. It's the same one I take now, and I was discharged on Christmas Eve, still psychotic, and then readmitted in January 2000 for 3 weeks, and then came out again, discharged again, and then slowly, I got better, I was catatonic at one point, right? Or I would be having verbal diarrhea, one or the other, But slowly I started to smile again, I started to crack jokes again. It was a big, schizophrenia is very traumatic mentally, and you're never going to be the same person you were before, but that doesn't mean you can't be a good, contributing, loving, beautiful, talented person afterwards. So now, I consider myself in recovery, and I have insight into my illness. So recovery means that I'm doing well again, and I'm proud of who I am, and I'm giving back. Insight, I have insight in my illness. I have knowledge of self. I know myself, I know my illness, I know how to stay well, I keep balance. Very important for everybody, but especially for people with mental illnesses, to keep a balance. So I have my faith still, I still believe in Jesus. I have my medication, I have my family and friends. I eat right, I exercise. I did karate for 9 years. I achieved my brown belt. And I taught kids in Scarborough for 6 years. Recently, I've stopped doing karate, and I'm focusing all my energy into yoga now. So I'm loving that. I've got a new girlfriend lately, so I'm enjoying her company. I work for the HOPE team, Help Overcome Psychosis Early. It's the early intervention team. Our office is in Aurora, and we're in the community all around York region. So life is good. I go to church regularly. I just took up golf this past year, so you want to know about ups and downs. That for sure is. And I like to play poker. But would any of you have guessed that I had schizophrenia if I didn't tell you? Good. So remember that. And remember that although people with mental illnesses, they are on the street, they are sometimes in the jail system, they're not always. They can be regular people like myself, right? And I hope you remember that. Thanks for listening.